Okay, I'll call this meeting of the Muncie Ethics Commission to order. For the record, I'll call a roll, so we'll have a record of attendance. Susan Dillon,
Present.
W.C. Edwards,
Present.
James Lowe,
Present.
and Charles Taylor is present. Okay, our first order of business is selection of the fifth member of the commission. Just as a reminder, the requirements are a member of the commission may not be an elected official, appointed official, or employee of the city of Muncie, a member of any other city board, commission, or committee, an officer or employee of any political party. However, this shall not include an individual who is elected or appointed to serve as delegate to a party convention, or a person who is an owner, officer, director, or partner of a business organization which has been paid by the city and/or any of its agencies an aggregate amount exceeding $300,000 in the previous calendar year, and at all times, the member must be a resident of the city of Muncie. So, I'd open for nominations for the fifth member. I would like to nominate Sandra Whitaker.
I'll second that.
Okay, nomination of Sandra Whitaker has been made and seconded. Any other nominations? Okay, hearing no other nominations, with just one nominee, can we just do a voice vote? Or do we need to do a roll? Voice, okay. All those in favor of appointment, wait a second. What am I doing? Andrew, come over here and tell us a little bit about your qualifications. Getting ahead of myself.
Excuse me. Well, by way of review, I did share some of these things before. I've been with Muncie Community Schools for 20 years approximately. Started as a substitute teacher and ended up as an administrator. Retired as an administrator. Prior to that, I taught in the Chicago area. And then, let me see, postgraduate studies included studies in human resources and ethics. It was an area of interest for me, integrity and ethics, and I took some professional development earlier on and then later as well, because that was one of the pillars of HR. So that was especially of interest to me, because I thought, this is what we do on a daily basis in administration. So it was reinforcing what I wanted to know more about and how to be more effective. So I am now retired. I did serve on the advisory committee for ethics, and as I stated before, very positive experience. And so here I am to do more if possible.
I'll say for my part, serving with Sandra on the Ethics Advisory Committee, she's very thoughtful about the way she approached the work that we were doing. Good ideas, just was a good committee member, and be glad to have her on here too. So, anybody else have any questions or anything for?
None.
Okay, so we've got, been nominated and seconded. All those in favor of appointment of Sandra Whitaker as the remaining commission member signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, congratulations.
Thank you.
We will take a very brief recess while the city clerk swears her in so that she can join us up here.
husbands. But, should we go there? Is that good?
Next order of business is the election of a chair. Open for nominations.
I'd like to nominate Chip Taylor.
I second.
Any other nominations? Okay, well, if there are no other nominations, then call for a voice vote. All those in favor of Taylor as chair signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you, I think. Okay, next up is election of a vice chair. It's open for nominations.
I nominate Susan Dillon.
I'll second that. Any other nominations? Hearing no other nominations, all those in favor of Susan Dillon to be elected vice chair signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. And election of secretary. Any nominations for secretary? I'd nominate James Lowe.
Second that.
All right, one nomination for James Lowe. Any other nominations? Okay, James Lowe is nominated as secretary. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. The other thing we need to vote on is, set our normal meeting times. I checked on the schedule of, the City Hall auditorium here. Basically, it's open Wednesday nights and Friday nights. Monday nights, Tuesday nights, Thursday nights, pretty well booked up or, reserved. One thing I was looking at what the Muncie, the Police Merit Commission does. They have two meetings nights a month scheduled, two weeks apart. Normally just meet on the first one, but then the second one's available if they have more work. I think that might be advisable for us. One thing I'll suggest, I guess what I'd like to do is somebody will make this motion and then we can discuss it. And if these nights, if the nights don't work, then, we can amend it. But, scheduled we need to have two meetings this month so that we could get the work done that needs to be done before the March 1st, to be ready to accept complaints. I scheduled those on the second and fourth Wednesday. That schedule would work. There are other schedules that might work. I don't know. I'd learned a little bit about people's schedules when I was, scheduling the first meeting. But if somebody cared to make the motion that their meeting nights be the second and fourth Wednesday, then we could open it up for discussion and figure out if that actually works.
I will make the motion that our meetings are scheduled on the second and fourth Wednesdays at 6 p.m.
Is there a second on that?
Second.
Second.
Okay. Okay, I'll open that up for discussion. So anybody have that doesn't work for or would want to propose something different?
I think it's perfect. If you go with Friday, I think you're gonna be in a situation where our schedules are probably gonna not align
Right.
for the
Yeah.
weekends.
That's
It's too
what I
much going
thought.
on.
And
Yeah.
talking to somebody, I think somebody's first Wednesday is usually booked up. So, okay, and that would be, like I said, we would meet on the second, under that, we would meet on the second Wednesday, and the fourth Wednesday would be available if we needed a second meeting.
And assuming if one of those fall on a holiday, we default to the one that does not fall on a holiday. Yep. Good.
Yeah, there's, of course, there's only
Only a few.
only a few Wednesday
Yeah.
holidays, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Motion has been made and seconded that we set our standard meeting times on the second and fourth Wednesdays of the month at 6 PM here in City Hall Auditorium. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So, those are the things that we needed to vote on tonight. I had asked Mr. Gibson and Ms. Christ if they would sort of, Sandra and I have been through some of the stuff in the ordinance. Not everybody is familiar with it, and I thought it would be helpful if they kind of walk us through what our responsibilities are. I assume we may have some questions. You want to sort of go through a section and then take questions or wait till all at the end?
If you don't mind, just wait till the end. That way I may cover something that could come up in a
wish.
question. Thank you all. My name is Dan Gibson. For those of you who don't know me, I am the attorney for City Council, and I was also a member of the Ethics Advisory Committee, along with Sandra and Chip, that helped draft the initial draft of this ordinance that was ultimately revised and adopted by City Council. As Chip said, he asked me to be here tonight just to kind of give a brief overview of what your duties and responsibilities are as outlined in the ordinance. The ordinance that was adopted by Council really did four things. It created a code of ethics, which I'm sure you have all seen at this point. It created the Ethics Commission, which has now been formed, with the fifth member being appointed this evening. And then it also established a complaint and enforcement procedure for complaints alleging violations of the Ethics Code. And then finally set forth some training and reporting requirements for the city moving forward. With respect to the Ethics Commission, the five of you sitting up there, you have jurisdiction over current and former elected officials, appointed officials, individuals appointed to boards and commissions and offices of the cities, in addition to officers and employees of the city, solely with respect to the interpretation and enforcement of the Code of Ethics. Your primary duties are to oversee compliance with the Code of Ethics, such as creating forms for certain disclosures that have to be made under the Ethics Code, accepting filings, providing notices to individuals who may have failed to file something as required under the Code of Ethics, and issuing advisory opinions. If somebody comes to you and before there's any, question and says, hey, I'm proposing this happen, or I would like to do this, can you give me an advisory opinion on whether or not this would perhaps violate the Code of Ethics? And then your second primary duty is to process complaints alleging violation of the Code of Ethics. And essentially, this commission provides a mechanism or a forum for complaints to be fairly reviewed and investigated, and provide due process to those individuals that are subject to a complaint alleging a violation. Now, with respect to your authority, that's outlined in detail in the ordinance, but just as a quick overview, as I mentioned before, you have the authority to issue advisory opinions related to the interpretation of the Ethics Code. You have the authority to initiate and conduct investigations, issue findings and conclusions, recommend appropriate corrective action, refer violations or alleged violations to law enforcement, refer alleged violations to Corporation Counsel for enforcement as an actual ordinance violation. And then you have some general authority that assists you in your investigation, such as the authority to compel production of documents, the authority to compel the attendance of witnesses and to retain legal counsel to assist as needed. There are certain limits to your authority that aren't necessarily expressly stated in the ordinance, but are certainly implied in the ordinance, and that is you don't have any authority to discipline employees. You don't have the authority to remove any member of a board or commission, and certainly don't have the ability to remove any elected official of the city of Muncie. And you have no authority to issue fines or render a judgment of an ordinance violation. Those are all things that have a separate process, depending on the individual and conduct that would perhaps be involved, but those are not within your authority or purview. With respect to the complaint procedure, the ordinance outlines kind of just a general process with some basic deadlines that the advisory committee felt was important to put in place. But at the same time, it was always contemplated by the advisory committee with the draft that was presented to council, that you all would put in place a more detailed procedure that you felt was appropriate to kind of nail down the details on the complaint procedure. We didn't want to get too much into the weeds of telling you how to do your job, but we did want to make sure there were certain safeguards in place, certain due process protections in place with respect to the timing of complaints and what is public and not public. There are also certain notice requirements set forth in the ordinance that ensures that someone that may be alleged to have violated the code of ethics is provided adequate notice and is given a fair opportunity to defend themselves with respect to a complaint. We also set forth in the ordinance kind of some guidelines regarding your decision and what you can do. Generally, when a complaint comes to you, and again, this is set forth in more detail in the ordinance, but you can dismiss the complaint under certain circumstances, and if there's a finding of a violation after a public hearing, you must issue findings and conclusions and make recommendations for corrective action or refer it to Corporation Counsel for enforcement proceedings. You also have the ability to resolve a case or an alleged violation by agreed resolution. And then finally, the training and reporting component is pretty self-explanatory in the ordinance, sets forth certain training requirements for employees of the city, appointed officials of the city, as well as members of boards and commissions. Also creates a transparency portal that requires certain documents be made public, such as documents that will be filed with you all if there's a conflict of interest that needs to be disclosed, as well as contracts and other items and documents of the city. There is to be a portal where it's kind of a one-stop shop to find all of those documents to improve transparency. And then finally, there is a reporting requirement for the Ethics Commission to report to council. I believe it's on an annual basis, just kind of a brief summary of what's happened, and with respect to complaints, some basic statistics on that, how many were received, how they were processed, and that type of thing. So as I said, that's kind of a brief breakdown of the ordinance that was recently adopted by council, as well as a brief overview of your duties and responsibilities. Happy to answer any questions. Aubrey Christ is also here. She's one of the assistant city attorneys, and she was involved in the revisions and review of the ordinance before it was adopted by council.
So, you said earlier, maybe I just misunderstood, Dan, we could be an advisory prior to submitting, but to be an advisory, they must submit a form, right, to request that advisory.
Yes, so an advisory.
It can't be verbal, it can't be just,
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
That wasn't contemplated to be a formal process. Somebody comes to you and says, hey, this contract has come up, or, I've got this potential position. I'm not sure if this falls within or is prohibited by the code of ethics. Can you all let me know before I go any further whether or not this is prohibited or not?
okay, thank you.
Anyone else have questions for?
No, but your recommendation on getting this portal set up would be sooner the better, but, I mean, we could have somebody submit within a couple weeks. So we have to work with Belinda to set this up?
If you want to set it up through the website, we could do, I mean, they have a page we're going to edit, so it doesn't say advisory, it says commission. And then I suggested, but this is all based on to leave the advisory information there, but just drop it down and put the commission at the top. And all the forms could be added in hyperlinks, which we do council and our page anyway, so I mean, like, it's doable.
Yeah, I mean, that's entirely up to you guys, but I think they've got a great system in place. I mean, our website already has so much information, and I don't know if there's, I know we've talked in the past about perhaps, creating a separate link on Municode. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. But there you can find the current ordinances as well as every ordinance dating back to, I don't know what it is now, Belinda, but I was looking at one from the 90s earlier today, so.
Ordinances go back to the 80s, but, and we're still have more that we can upload, we just have to have time. But, I had to discuss with the Municode, I need to call our representative, see if we can give them their own heading, separate from the, I think they're under unofficial headings, most of these, I can't remember when.
The advisory committee stuff?
Yes,
Yeah, I think it was under the, unofficial or preliminary or something. I forget the exact word.
that's one of the things that's on my to-do list, is to see if we can get their own separate heading added. Now, then we can just link that to the section of the website, I mean, we're just hyperlinking it, so.
And then we could organize, we get would be the commission's records, agendas, minutes, all that stuff, and then also the documents that go in the transparency portal would be in a section within that section.
We could do that.
Okay.
I have one other question, but we'll hand it off to Susan, I think. Sorry to do this to you. So within the ordinance, you got a section that talks about whistleblower protection. If there's some thought to maybe expanding protection for that whistleblower, does it have to go back to city council to expand that paragraph?
I mean, I think it would depend on what type of additional protection you are seeking, but I mean, I think this is pretty broadly worded, but if you're wanting to add more detail, then yes, I would think that would need to be something that comes back to the council, and that actually is a great reminder of something I forgot to mention. It is certainly within your responsibilities and duties as you get into this. If you think there's something that needs to be revised or amended with the Code of Ethics, once you get it in practice, to certainly recommend that to council for an amendment of some sort.
So I've actually put together a documentation of things that I think we need to address out the gate,
Okay?
and I'll give you copies of these. And I'm just going to briefly go through some of the ideas in here. First of all, we'll go ahead and take the definition of whistleblower, and also violation of it, like if you did a false report directly from the ordinance. But continuing on, we first have the procedure that we'll be following, or somebody reporting would follow, which we will have a monthly Ethics Commission complaint procedure, but that doesn't include holding the Ethics Commission accountable if somebody feels that there is something going on here that needs to be investigated. So we'll need to discuss that further. I just came up, just an idea, but it could be discussed and changed, is any reports or concerns involving the Ethics Commission should be reported to the Chief Executive of the City of Muncie and/or Board President of the Muncie City Council for immediate consultation. So I've come up with ideas of how we would be held accountable if there's a concern. And then it defines also the whistleblower is not responsible for the investigation. It makes that very clear. They're just presenting facts, right?
Sure.
And then, again, there's no retaliation, and examples might include threats of unemployment, decreased compensation, poor work assignments, or threats of harm. If person who believes there is retaliation must contact the Muncie Ethics Commission immediately for an investigation. And then I believe that we need to make sure that there's not a barrier to people who are afraid to report. So we need to address the identity issue. So just, my idea was whistleblower identity is to be confidential to the extent that confidentiality can be maintained in the investigation. So it's not a promise, but the promise is to try to keep it confidential. False reports, and that comes out of the ordinance, are considered a violation of Code of Ethics and will be subject to enforcement provisions set forth therein. But then we also want to request anybody who's doing reporting not to make it public before we have an opportunity to investigate, because it could be biased. So we would ask them to do a written report submitted to the Muncie Ethics Commission concerning the matter in adequate time allowed for the commission to investigate and reach a decision as to any further action to be taken as defined in the ordinance. So those are the ideas I had, that I don't think that the whistleblower protection goes far enough in the ordinance. And I have this as something that we can discuss, you can look at, give your recommendations.
Sure, absolutely.
Anything? That's a question, I think it's kind of related to that. It at least overlaps with it in some respects. So, and, we talked about this during when the advisory committee was meeting, that was a long time ago, it seems like. Of course, there's a part of the records and meetings, and it's, basically, I mean, that section says we'll comply with, the Public Records Act and, open door law. There is, in the complaint process, which we'll talk more specifically about the complaint process, but, it says in there that, until we actually decide to go forward, until we actually make a decision to go forward with an investigation, it's just referred to by complaint number. I guess, how does that correspond to, like, when, so, when somebody files a complaint, like, initially, it's not a public record, but, because it's investigative, I presume that, but at some point, I guess the decision has to be made, or at some point it becomes a public record, and I was wondering if either of you had some thoughts on that with respect to the complaint process.
I can tell you what I looked at when I took the primary lead in preparing as part of the advisory committee in preparing this process. There was a discussion about how we could try to protect somebody from a frivolous or false complaint. And this is done in other, contexts at, the merit commissions, and, it's a little bit different because there's some statutory procedures for them. But there is a section of the Access to Public Records Act that allows you to withhold the production of documents that are prepared in anticipation of an executive session. And an executive session is permitted to discuss alleged wrongdoing of somebody over whom you have jurisdiction. So I think that initially can allow that to be protected, the actual complaint. However, I think that protection is lost if it then moves into a, probable cause public hearing comes forward. The information is going to come out in the hearing that was put forth in the complaint. So I think at that point, I'd have to think through it a little more. It would become a public record. So I think it just would be a matter of how that complaint is processed as to, one, if it becomes a public record, and two, when it becomes a public record. But I can tell you that was my intent to address the concerns by the advisory committee from protecting against, false and frivolous complaints.
So in that case, if somebody filed a complaint that then at the public meeting acted on it by complaint number and say was dismissed because it was frivolous or didn't, actually allege a violation, one of the provisions where it can be dismissed, at that point, there was a complaint, it had number such and such, it was dismissed for these reasons, but there's no, it didn't become a public record because it didn't go further.
Correct. And the only document that was presented to you was a document that was prepared in anticipation of an executive session because it was giving details about wrongdoing
Okay.
of somebody over whom you have jurisdiction.
Right, okay. So, but if, past that, if we did anything to take action that was not dismissing it other than maybe staying it for, well, it's basically anything else we did at that point, then it becomes a public document.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, the information contained within that document, if the complaint goes further, becomes public information. At that point, I think it's really just a matter of the protection or the confidentiality being waived. And so, if it's out there in another form, then it's hard to argue that it's not a public record.
If I could add, the public access counselor may have an idea on how to resolve that. He offers up informal opinions over the phone all the time. So that's something you could talk to Luke about directly.
Okay. Yeah, because I guess the other thing I said, with regard to whistleblower protection specifically, of course, the complaint process requires that the respondent receive a copy of the complaint, within 7 days. So, if they receive that, then they're going to know who complained.
Within 7 days from the point of our findings,
7 days from the filing.
from the filing. Wow.
I said that off the top of my head. Now let me. Yeah, 4201B.
The-
I mean, I think you are correct. I think that's something to consider perhaps in consultation with the Public Access Council on whether or not at least the name of the complaining party. I mean, but
Yeah,
it may be able to be ascertained by just the nature of the complaint itself. But I mean, at some point, we got to weigh, confidentiality with the accused person's right to know the allegations against them and defend themselves.
So you're suggesting maybe we can redact the name.
Perhaps. That's just kind of something that I don't know. That's something I think we'd want to talk to Luke Britt about, but I mean, that's just kind of my initial.
That's a good point. That puts the whistleblower, I think, in a,
yeah. Yeah, that was one of the things, when the committee was meeting, we were talking about this, I mean, we're trying to balance, on the one hand, it's like, what we do should be as transparent as we can make it, consistent with like the other things that the commission is trying to accomplish.
all right.
On the other hand, we didn't want to provide a, venue for people to just file frivolous complaints and then, just for the, I guess, enjoyment of seeing them discussed in public. But that's, I think we can talk about that as we sort of go through the complaint process. And I think, well, anyway, any other questions for Dan or Aubrey?
Did that answer your question?
Well, I still would like them to review it and give feedback on
Okay.
this. I mean, it's written, I didn't read it word for word.
Yeah, maybe, if additional whistleblower protections are put in place, or you provide more detail as to what you consider to be a violation of that provision, that may provide some comfort, in those that,
Yeah.
to kind of lessen the concern about their name getting out there once they file that complaint.
Well, that could certainly be a barrier
Could.
of individuals feeling free to report something that needs to be reported. is that fear of retaliation.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess I've got two, yeah, you count them, documents to discuss. So.
Are you done with me?
Yeah,
you done with
I
me?
think for-
Okay.
We may have questions as we get into this.
Do we want Aubrey to, is she going to present the ethics?
Oh, I was just here to answer any questions.
You're just in support for Dan?
Yeah,
Okay, all right,
if you need
good,
anything from the legal department, we're here, so.
okay, thanks. Sorry, go ahead. Jim.
Yeah, so we've got, I think we've got a lot we've got to do in the short term. I think the main things to do before the end of this month is, the complaint process needs, people need to be able to file a complaint if they've got it, and we'll have the process, fleshed out of how it will be handled. I guess, first of all, I'd like to sort of briefly, so also, feel like we need general rules and procedures just to sort of govern so I've got the draft general rules and procedures that I'd sent around, and maybe, I don't know how much discussion this takes, but I'll sort of walk through, sort of briefly, high level, what we've got here. So it's got the purpose, and it's guidelines for us to do the things set out, in this Title IV in the ordinance. And I adapted a lot of this from the Muncie, the Police Merit Commission procedures, the part of the conduct the meeting. So in this case, a quorum is a majority of the commission, 3 members, constitute a quorum for the transaction of business. Then it has in Section 2, is about the officers and organization. It says we'll have a chair, vice chair, and a secretary. We elect them at the first meeting of the year. Officers hold office for a year. It lists general duties of the chair, the vice chair, and the secretary, which I've got. This is a copy from the public access handbook that I've highlighted the part, that's what goes in a meeting memorandum. May find handy.
Thank you.
And I got some typos in here. I can't spell chair sometimes for some reason. And then it talks about, just refers vacancies back to the ordinance. So that's all pretty standard. Lists what we talked about with the, regular meetings. For calling special meetings, it can be called by the chair or the vice chair if the chair is out of the city, or joint action of two commission members. Notice of meetings basically just says that we'll comply with the open records law and open door law. What I did for this meeting and what I would propose, that we continue doing, if you're meeting on Wednesday, I distributed the agenda and any meeting materials to the members and to the city clerk's office so that they could be filed. That would be my general procedure going on, because then Monday, Monday before would be the 48 hours, and that keeps us. I also. City Communications Director emailed me today and asked for a copy of the agenda, and I of course, sent her one, and I told her that I'd make sure that whenever we send them out, I'll get them to her, the agenda to her at that same time. So that's that part. Special meetings, reconvene meetings, notice, and then on the conduct, standard reference to, Robert's Rules of Order. And also put in here, so there's some places in the ordinance where it says that there are certain specific things that it says that the commission can do by a majority vote. And I interpreted that's a majority of the entire commission and not just a majority of whoever's present and voting.
Yeah, that's how I would
Yeah.
interpret it, yeah.
And so what I put in here, this item 2 here, it says, "The majority vote of the members present shall be necessary for the lawful transaction of business by the commission, provided that on acts listed in that section 4104 of the Code of Ethics, a majority of commission members shall be required." And so the idea was if we're setting a meeting or just doing some sort of routine business, a majority of the quorum can do it. But if we're doing the things that are like really, acting on complaints, those require a majority of the commission. So it'd take three votes no matter what. I left, to be filled in here, public comment policy. So I'm open to suggestions on that. I guess I should say, so my idea with this, get whatever feedback we have from people here tonight, and then what I would propose on this and the other things we're going to talk about, the vice chair and I can kind of collaborate, consult with the city attorney as needed, make sure, we're not, going off deep end someplace. And, hopefully come back, 2 weeks with a version that's, that you would have in advance of the meeting that should be clean and ready to go and address the different issues. So, anybody got any thoughts on the public comment policy?
I gotta think about that.
Okay,
I mean, that's good, but
yeah.
they would actually be speaking to what? What would they be speaking to?
So I've given this a little bit of thought, and so my thought was when we're doing, this routine business, something sort of like city council, I mean, if we're addressing some item on the agenda, so we say, and so I'm setting aside, so what I mean by routine business, when we're doing something other than acting on complaints. Okay, so like tonight, we're talking about policy, we're setting a schedule, we're doing things like that. Have an opportunity for public comment. Time limited. They could, speak to items on the agenda that, but no public comment. If we're doing one of the actions where we're making a decision about the complaint, no public comment on that. I don't know what public comment there is. It's like
Or public comment doesn't give the public the ability to come in and register their complaint in public.
Right, that was the other thing.
Okay.
Advise people like.
I'd be
that-
concerned
that-
about
That
that.
public comment is not the venue for filing a
It's not the
complaint.
venue.
There's, that requires a written complaint. I mean, talk about the agenda, they could, if there are other issues. So would not be quite as freewheeling as city council public comment. Sandra, yeah.
How is that to be established? For example, at the beginning of the meeting, you set the tone, and you could even state what's expected, so there's no doubt. I mean,
Yeah,
it could
I-
be stated every time.
Yeah, I
I
think-
don't know.
Yeah, I think whenever public comment was open, that statement would need to be made.
And then I also had a comment about and you brought it up, time limits, when we did the advisory, excuse me, committee, we didn't put time limits. There weren't a lot of people there, so it was not a big issue, but it could be an issue. So that was something I am concerned about,
Yeah,
time limits.
yeah. Okay. Okay. So in that, y'all trust, Susan and I may draft something and distribute in advance of the next meeting.
I did have a question before you leave this.
Certainly,
Jeff.
yeah.
So I don't know what you do with other public meetings like city council, but is there a certain time that you have to cancel a meeting prior to the meeting, or can it be canceled 5 minutes up to the meeting? So, we had to do that last week
Yeah.
for various reasons, but if tonight, because of weather or whatever, do you have to post that? How do you get the word out that it's canceled, or do you just put a notice on the door?
Well, we'd have to put a notice on the door. I mean, put something on Facebook, but it depends on somebody checks.
Yeah.
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 But there's no legal requirement that you have, if you know,
There's not.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, you may run into the issue where you don't have a quorum and you have to cancel when you're here already.
Right, when we're
So
here. Yeah.
There's not a requirement for that. There's a requirement for posting those
Thank you. Sorry, Jim.
No, that's good question. Okay. Well, then, is that okay with you? We'll work on that. Is there anything else you think should be addressed in these general rules and procedures that is not separate from the complaint process?
Not for me at this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is, we can always, we get down the road and decide that we need to amend them, we can amend them. Okay, so I guess the other thing I'd like for us to discuss, and we sort of got into it a little bit already, but, complaint procedure, and so again, I'm proposing here for, discussion purposes, I've tried to outline, start filling in some of the details that need to be filled in from the complaint procedure and the ordinance to make it actionable. And so I'll kind of go through a little bit of this. So again, it's just got the purpose. It's about establishing complaint procedure. The first section on reasonable time, I got to thinking, it's like I wasn't sure. It's like I had assumed, like when we're talking about number of days and stuff, that it's calendar days. But I thought, I bet there's some. I knew from working in local government before, there's someplace in the ordinance where it says how these things are counted. And so I referenced that, and I'll hope the attorneys will tell me if that was correct. But
You're fine.
okay, but basically, it just if somebody files a complaint, the next day is day one. Right. Day 7 is when the notice has to be provided. If that, that end day, if the end day of a period, if it falls on a Saturday, Sunday, holiday, et cetera, that's basically it. It just kicks to the next day. That's not one of those. Then there's a section about filing a complaint. And what I've written here, sort of, it assumes that somebody's filing a complaint in person on paper. I talked to the city clerk a little bit. I mean, there's maybe provisions to provide things online. I think maybe that may take a little more time to set up. And so,
If you have a form that you already have created, we could put it in a PDF format where they could fill it out, email it to
Fillable.
one or all of you. Or they could, if you wanted them
yeah,
to present it in paper,
yeah,
we could receive it in our office and put it in a safe like we do with bids.
okay. Yeah, I guess my thought at this point is like we should get like a paper filing process in place, and then we can add an online.
start with.
To start with, and then,
And there, in my opinion, you should maintain both,
Yeah.
because there's probably people who don't have access to internet,
Right.
yeah.
so they can't get online to do this, so they'd come in with a hard copy, which
Yeah.
makes sense to give them both options.
They want to put it in an envelope and then we just,
Right.
just put it in the safe until someone picks, whatever your procedure, someone comes to pick it
Yeah.
up, we
Right.
can tell you that we can even file stamp it for the date that
Yeah.
it comes in the office.
Yeah, so I had a chance to talk to Belinda about this a little bit. And so the clerk's office is set up to, take things like this, right? And so, and here, like, they're filing a complaint, they have to use the form that we've adopted for that purpose. And I put in here, I put agent, because I hadn't, when I was writing this, I hadn't had a chance to talk to, I didn't want to put the city clerk in there without talking to the city clerk. It said would receive complaints on behalf of the commission, would not accept complaints that weren't signed, because it's a requirement of the ordinance, it has to be signed. Would stamp accepted complaints with the date received. If you're accepting a complaint, would assign it a file number. Would treat each complaint as confidential information until such time as it's in the public record. And the idea was that after that, some method, after receiving the complaint, the agent would forward it to the chair. Or in the absence of the chair, to the vice chair. At that point, when you look in the ordinance, the first determination has to be made if somebody, if somebody files a complaint that alleges a criminal violation as opposed to violation of our ordinance, then the commission doesn't deal with that. What I proposed in here, after receiving the complaint, the chair would consult with the city attorney and say, look, this, if it's a criminal violation, then they'd refer it to the appropriate law enforcement agency, and then we're done. We don't take any further action on it if it alleges a criminal act, because that would be, and I would think at that point, it's not moved further on into the complaint process, so there would be no notice sent to the respondent.
Yeah, if you're not moving forward with it, if it's not even something you can
Yeah.
do.
That's, because I assume the law enforcement agency would not want us telling, oh, hey, by the way, someone accused you of bribery, but we've turned that over to the state's attorney, then, of course, it kind of restates that, they got to provide a copy to the complainant within 7 days. Is there any legal requirement about it? I mean, does that have to be sent by, like, certified mail, or is it, if,
On the notice.
yeah.
I mean, there's nothing in the ordinance.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing in the ordinance, but is there any legal requirement for?
I mean, I think that's certainly something you guys can require. I mean, I think proof of receipt is always important.
Okay. Return re-
Follow what the Merit Commission does and do the
Yeah.
first class certified.
Okay. And then it just states, there's the initial review, and that's within 15 days of the receipt. That's when the commission meets in executive session to receive information regarding a complaint and discuss whether the complaint warrants further investigation. And I'm assuming that's something, if it was, probably be a good idea, to have a city attorney, like, weigh in on that.
Yeah, you just let our office know if you
Okay.
want an attorney here and we'll set one.
Okay. And then, like I said, then a lot of the rest of it is just, it's kind of basically restating, referring to things in the ordinance. Up to the point, and the rest of it then is governed by the things that we can vote on to decide to do. I guess I'd shared this with you. Is there anything we've left out of here you think that needs to be addressed, or?
You may want to come up with a procedure for those hearings and how you're going to conduct those.
Yeah, and that's, I'll tell you, I looked some at like the hearing procedures for the Merit Commission. I think that's something we might need some help on.
I would recommend also looking at the Human Rights Commission in Bloomington because they have hearings and a lot of what they deal with are kind of similar to what you deal with in terms of some of it being confidential. But I would take a look at their procedures as well.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think that's probably the next thing to work on after we get the complaint process in place. I mean, having the hearing procedure figured out. But I don't think we have to have that by the end of this month, because it would take us a while to get to the questions, comments, any of that. Okay. I also included in this, and I'll be the first one to tell you, I'm not the person to have like designing forms. But I put together this mainly to get the sort of information that I thought we would want to gather on the form. So We ask for information of the person filing, their name, mailing address, phone number, et cetera. Then information about the alleged violation. So the name of the alleged violator, date and time when the alleged violation occurred, location, those are all things that are requested required as part of the ordinance. Description of what they did that they believe violated the code of ethics. And then I added a couple things that aren't actually in the ordinance, but just from my experience working in local government, like if we were like looking into a harassment complaint or something, the other thing we normally is like, was there anybody else that witnessed what happened? And if they know if there's any evidence, is there an email that like, backs up what you said happened, anything like that? So I added those, and then the signature, and have sort of some simple instructions for it. Is there, yeah.
Well, I've got, just thought of a question. Hopefully you guys can answer this. So I filed this form. It's incumbent upon the person filing the form to give us the information that's sufficient for us to take the appropriate.
Well, I'm gonna
And-
stop you,
Yep.
because they can give you initial information, and based on that initial
That's where I'm going.
information is how you decide whether there's enough to proceed and investigate.
So if they don't, and we go, looks frivolous to us, and we report that back to the complainant, step two, they may and could, okay, I'll provide you more information, and they could follow up. That's where I was going to go with the conversation. We just don't have enough to act upon what you've submitted to us. We're not asking for more information, but we tell them we don't have enough information to take it to the next step. It doesn't forego their rights to come back with additional information. We go, thank you,
Yeah, that,
Yeah.
Just amend their complaint.
amend their complaint.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
add the additional information, whatever you need to start your investigation. at
Yeah.
this point.
because that's one of the options for dismissal is like, it's not that it's frivolous, it's just it doesn't allege sufficient
Right.
facts.
Okay.
And so, I mean, like if it was too vague about, well, when did it happen, if they can't tell us when it happened, where it happened, at least approximately, I mean, one thing I did steer away from, like, I don't think they need to necessarily be able to state what part of the ordinance that I mean, they just need to describe what they saw that they think
Right.
is a violation. One of the things I thought it would also be useful to have on the website, just like it could probably be on a one-page document, sort of frequently asked questions. It's like, okay, I filed, if I file a complaint, what happens? And it just sort of like lays out the, sort of the time frame and what's going to happen. Or, I'm the subject of a complaint, like what happens next, and the same sort of thing. And so that's, part of the educational process. So, any other comments about, Susan, I keep creating work for you and I.
That's fine.
Okay.
Part of my question would be the notice of the person who's being reported. What kind of notice would they receive? Is it going to be typed from this? I would assume we're not going to be copying this and sending them a copy of the complaint.
Well, I think that's so, actually what it says in the ordinance, they'll be provided with a copy of the complaint.
So, going to the whistleblower protection, do we want to do this with two separate forms? One is the complainer, and then one is the complaint? So that, they'll be connected by a code or a number, so that they can be provided the alleged ethics violation, but not necessarily the identification of the person who reported it.
I think that goes back to the discussion we're having before, May, that's the thing, that's something to talk to the public access counselor about the, just that whole issue of balancing, like, protection of the complainant versus, at some point, if I mean, if it goes on, at some point, the person that filed the complaint has to, I mean, chances are they'll most likely have to testify to what they saw.
Potentially, but they will be
Potentially.
known to us.
That,
It's just a matter of when and if they are known to the public for their protection.
Just part of that public record issue. So before you recommend to council that they change the ordinance,
Yeah.
I recommend talking to Luke first.
that, yeah, maybe we can get together, maybe we can get on a call and talk to Luke together, the two of us, find out. Okay. So, I guess what I'm proposing, Susan and I can work on draft this, we'll try and get something together. Talk to Luke Britt about some of these public access issues. And run whatever draft we come up with by the city attorney, make sure we're not going off the rails someplace, so that we can circulate this before the next meeting, and hopefully have something we can adopt. Sidebar?
No, we're good.
Okay.
And you're doing training with all the officials and administrators and so forth. You've got
We'll
to,
have to get that scheduled with all of you as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
that was, yeah, that was, so I had on here sort of other business, and we've talked about some of it, so city clerk has arranged for us to have like, generic Ethics 1, Ethics 2 email addresses that will keep, if we share the complaints that way, I certainly didn't want them in my own personal email. That seemed like, we'll work on like what needs to be on the website. We may need to have, I'm sure I have to have another conversation with you.
Yeah, come on in and we'll sit down and
Okay.
talk as we go.
Yeah, I forget which city board it was. I saw there was training, on an agenda, but I don't know. So like for the boards, is the HR been coming in and doing the training like in a meeting, or they set up a time and we go in, or what?
I don't know what HR has been doing. I
Okay.
can look into that, but
But you can do the required training that we need?
yes, and Dan just offered to help. so.
Oh, okay, he's a good guy. He's very helpful. Okay, and so I think we're the thing that stayed the complaint process until March 1st. We need to have it done before March 1st.
You should.
That's what I thought.
And then our office will need to know if you want an attorney at all of your meetings, or how do you want that set up?
Probably these initial meetings while we're setting like these procedures and stuff in place and adopting them, probably, after that, maybe just when we have complaints, or, if we're doing, once we get these procedures in place, we don't have a complaint, I'm really not sure what we would meet about. But we've got some work to do to get the processes in place. So I think I've got your email, and,
And I'll give everybody a card too, so they.
Okay. And you said that was the Bloomington Human Rights Commission that had some procedure we might look at for hearing?
I believe it's.
Okay. Any other business? Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn?
so moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you, everybody.
You wouldn't know me. I work in the school system
This is-
at
this is-
Wilson.